Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPL, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe Ojejo,
Hello, I'm Rice.
and today we have a very special episode because it is the beginning of our season previews. We're going to be going through the course of March, going over each of the individual 8 teams in the CPL and going over what to expect of them, some questions that might still need to be answered, what the strengths are, what their advantages are, disadvantages, their weaknesses, and all of the above. We're very excited to delve into what will be an exciting 2024 season. But before we dive into that, there is some news that we have to share, Mike, about ourselves,
Yes.
as we love to announce things this year, changes of look and aesthetic and logo, the zine, and now we have a very special announcement where Coast to Coast FC is going to be in partnership with the excellent Canadian Soccer Daily. So now you can find us on the CSD website if you want to watch our content there. Brendan Dunlop and ourselves have been talking all about this partnership for a little while now, so we're very excited to actually have this going forward and actually launching it properly now. So yeah, if you ever want to see our things when they're not on Spotify or on YouTube, you can go to their website and you can check out our video podcast there, plus some clips and stuff that we'll post on social media as well. But yeah, very excited for how this is going to help our
Yeah.
brand continue to grow and hopefully have more listeners and more people in the community. Very exciting times for us, isn't it, Mike?
Oh, super exciting. What a weekend to start it off. I mean, Canadian strikers scoring goals all over Europe. Was it 7 points out of 9 from MLS sides? And now we're bringing the CPL content as well to the sites. Yeah, exciting times.
Exactly. And as always, remember to follow us on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC. And you can always find us on YouTube now as well under the same name. And yeah, now make sure to follow Canadian Soccer Daily as well and on their socials. And you'll see our lovely faces on there now too. But let's go straight into now our 2024 CanPL season previews. And this week we're going to start with 2 clubs, as we're going to go 2-2-2-2 for the next 4 weeks. So the first 2 clubs that we're going to go with are Atletico Ottawa and the Halifax Wanderers. So we're going to start in the capital with Ottawa. And some of the points that we're going to go over are obviously their statement signings. Have they fixed their mentality issues that they had at the end of last season? Does Carlos Gonzalez need to think about a plan B? And as a lot of people have already mentioned, are they the early season favorites for the league title and maybe even the playoffs? We're going to talk about all of this and more right now. So let's start with our big incomings. We're not going to go in depth about every signing because we've already done stuff like that. We're going to talk about some of the big players they brought in. Honestly, it was hard to narrow down to just a few to talk to because when I mean statement signings, they truly are statement signings. You bring in the likes of Mateo Debrian, Balu Tabla, Ryan Yesley, Abubakar Sissoko, Jonathan Grant, Kevin Dos Santos. It's these are either tried and proven CPL stars or really exciting names from abroad, or Balu Tabla, which needs no introduction.
Reintroduction.
Reintroduction, exactly. So for you, Mike, looking at the way that Atletico Ottawa have built their squad so far, just focusing on the incomings, do you see the justification for the idea of them being sort of early season favorites?
I mean, which other team can you talk about a statement signing being what will potentially be the backup goalkeeper? Like this, they've got stuff all over the pitch here. Really exciting. I mean, we'll go into some of the bits where some of the possible holes that need addressing, but I mean, the players they brought in are full of excitement, and that's not something we often said about Ottawa last year.
No, exactly. Very quickly, Carlos Gonzalez and co. are switching the narrative up for
Mm,
Atletico Ottawa, going from what was arguably, last season quite a flat performance, especially in the latter parts, defensive football, and now they're bringing some really exciting, talented players
yeah.
that I can't see them sort of repeating that performance. But as you mentioned, there are some holes that they might need to be plugging in, specifically in the defense, because if you look at the players that they have allowed to leave because of loan expiry or contract
Mm,
expiry, we have pretty much an entire defensive line.
yeah.
Pretty much their starting defensive line. You have Diego Espejo, you got Luke Singh, and Miguel Acosta, just to name a few there. And you look at the players that they brought in, and aside from Mateo De Brienne, who is kind of a defender, kind of an attacker, kind of a midfielder, he's
Yeah.
just the left side entirely, almost. You can't
Yeah.
really pin him down anywhere. And obviously Jonathan Grant. These, aside from those two players, they haven't really brought anybody else
Mm.
in to sort of strengthen their defense. It's looking a little thin at the back. Do you think that's a cause for concern for Ottawa, or do you think they'll manage to figure something out?
Yeah, I think it's just a big sign that they're not done yet. I think there's going to be a little bit more organization with the roster, make some plans, identify how much is available in that cap, to see who they bring in and how much depth they can get, depending on the targets they've got. I mean, you must be the same as me. A centre back, at least one's got to arrive before the season starts.
Yeah, they really do, and especially when you consider also like we don't really know Lieberman Torres all that well.
Mm.
He's put down in some places like a defender. He's also put down some places as a midfielder. So we don't really know if he's a defensive midfielder.
Yeah.
So if you don't have him, let's say, as a proper defender, then yeah, you need to bring in some support because as versatile as Jonathan Grant is, we
Mm.
also know that he has a bit of an injury history. He might not be a player that you can rely on to play every single game, Iron Man like Dan Klump for Calorie. So
Yeah.
you definitely need to have Plan Bs in squad selection. We'll talk about
Yeah.
Plan Bs in a little bit as well. So I think that is just a few, maybe a couple missing pieces left. Again, there's still a full month and a bit before the season starts, so they have plenty of time to
Exactly.
bring some of these players in. But yeah, it is a little bit of a concern for them because on paper, just starting 11, they have probably one of the, if not arguably the strongest, just in terms
Mm.
of names. But if one or two of those, especially defenders, pick up some injuries or some suspensions and stuff like that, there's where Ottawa might sort of crumble a little bit throughout the season. So they definitely need to get some stability in depth at the defensive positions.
Mm.
But a huge talking point from last season that needs to be discussed this season is their mentality. Now, this is something that we've talked about at the end of the season.
Yeah.
We talked about in the zine. We talked about whatever. Basically, we talked about Ottawa last season. We talk about the tragedy in added time. The
Yeah.
fact that they kept losing
Mm.
over and over and over in added time, valuable points that basically made them go from outside favorites for the title to missing out on the playoffs entirely. Do you now for you, Mike? Do you think that with the not only the quality of players that they've brought in, but the experience that these players have, like obviously Balut Tabla, Abubakar Sissoko brings a championship mentality coming from Forge. Jonathan Grant, same thing at York and at Forge. He's a veteran of the CPL. Do you think by bringing in some of these more experienced heads, it'll help the players sort of avoid the same mistakes that they had last season in those extra few minutes at the end of the game?
Quite possibly. The big question that jumps out to me is that these players, yeah, they bring experience about managing a game, but Atletico Ottawa don't really manage the game with the ball. Last season they tried to manage it without the ball, so it's not these forwards and midfielders keeping possession and dictating a match. That's not what Carlos Gonzalez's side does. So that sort of makes you wonder how big of a factor the finding the right centre backs to come into this team is, because we're looking at a young Ty Walker making a big jump up probably this season, and if they are going to be playing in a similar style to last year, without without the ball, they need players in so they can start training and building that bond together. And the longer that takes, then I mean that's got to send a little bit of a worry around the capital, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I feel like it might be asking too much to have a huge stylistic change
Mm.
from the team so that they can manage games better by having the ball, like actually having the ball,
Yeah.
playing a bit more possession, playing less, this kind of low block defensive counter-attacking football. And that's why, I don't know if we can expect that from Carlos Gonzalez and his team moving forward. But the fans matter, as we know. The fans, their voices matter, and they've been sort of crying out for a bit more, I guess, adventure in the way that they play, just a bit more guts in it. And I know you can show that, defensively. We've seen great teams that have been very defensive be able to show that. But it might be easier for some of these players to, I always feel when I'm playing, I always feel calmer when my team has the ball than when my team doesn't have the
Mm.
ball, because when we have the ball, I know that they have to take the ball away from us to hurt us. If they have the ball, then they're the ones primed to hurt us. And
Mm.
obviously, tensions rise as time goes on, and as soon as it goes into added time, and you feel like you're so close, but you're still super anxious because anything could happen. Those are the moments where people switch off. Those are the moments where
Mm.
players might panic and go for a tackle, get dragged out of position, and then you have the situations that we saw
Yeah.
last season. So I don't know if it's as easy as just changing your style of play to be able to deal with that, or if it's something a bit more nuanced and maybe less drastic. But I do feel like definitely Carlos Gonzalez needs to make sure that his players have some sort of stability mentally in their game, not just for some periods of time, but for all 90 minutes plus
Yeah.
extra, because we can't have another. I mean, we can't have another repeat of what happened last season.
No. No, definitely not. And I think, like you say, like you like to have the ball, and like a possession-heavy team likes to have the ball, so they know that they're in control. And it's fine if Ottawa are going to stay being defensively resolute. A team can do that if their counter attack is threatening,
Hmm.
because the other team aren't going to throw people forward. But towards the end of last year, especially, teams were realizing that actually their counter attack isn't as dangerous as it was at the beginning of the year, and it was the year before. So they've like that put them on their it put their defense under even more pressure. He's added these pieces, like we've said. In some ways, you can look at it and think, "Oh yeah, this is a complete massive shift. They're going to go out all out attack. They're going to have the ball." Looking at these players, but it also gives them the chance to go into matches where the opposition are thinking actually they'll build up possession and they'll start getting forward, but but only a few players will do it, not quite as many as was happening last year, and it will make them more comfortable. But at the same token, like we're saying, they haven't got the defense really set in our minds. Maybe they did, so. That's they seem to be addressing one side of the coin, but still having work to do on the other.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that with the players that they have brought in, they are, sort of stacking their counter-attacking prowess now, because you
Yeah.
have players like Balu Tabla, you have players like Kevin Dos Santos, Chris Twardek, which we don't know too much about, but it seems like he's somebody that can make a difference. So they are bringing players in that can help them out in that attack. It really now is about if they can make sure that they are balanced in both things,
Yeah,
both in
exactly.
the defense and in the attack. because if there's that imbalance that we saw towards the end of last season, and that sort of again lends to the mentality thing. If you see things in front of you and they seem sort of chaotic, they seem disorganized, then that's just going to make you more panicky, more anxious, and that sort of leads to
Yeah,
the
exactly.
moments that we saw last season. So yeah, so like the recruitment on paper, of course, looks really really good, but I'm very curious to see if the way that Ottawa actually play on the pitch across the entire game, if that'll sort of really reflect their growth and their strength that they seem to be showing and
Yeah,
just their recruitment. Um, but yeah, like we mentioned before, they are right now potentially the favorites for the league title and for the playoff title. On paper, you see, like I just mentioned, the strength that they have in their additions, but you also see the strength that they have just in the players that they had from last season. You look at Ollie Bassett, people forget that he is MVP quality. He is
exactly.
one of the best
Mm.
players in the league, and what he really needed last season was support.
Yeah, it
And
runs
he
around
really,
them. Yeah.
yeah, he runs around and he's trying to do everything. And a
Mm,
player as good as him, you can't expect him to do everything at all times. You want him to do his best at the best times.
mm.
That's how you maximize a player like Ollie Bassett. And, when you bring in more players around him that can sort of help him out to take, you have players that make it so he has less jobs to do and he can focus on his one job by having, more attackers that can actually feed off his passes properly. You have more midfielders or defenders that make him feel like he has to drop back less because he feels more sure in there.
Mm.
That'll let you unleash a player like Ollie Bassett more, and I think that'll be a huge factor for Atletico Ottawa and their push
Yeah,
to try to be, basically bring back the title that they had 2 years ago
yeah.
to the capital once more.
Yeah, I mean, he was running down dead ends, and everywhere he turned, there was another defender so often. But now, I mean, you look at having Balou Tabla, even if he's not even if Ollie Bassett's got the ball and he's not passing directly to them, Tabla's movement's going to draw attention from defenders. All
Mhm.
of a sudden, there's an extra little gap. If they've got someone like Matteo Debrienne just bursting forward down that left wing, the right sided defender's is all of a sudden occupied. And now, like next season, like Ollie Bassett should, in theory, have more chances where he picks the ball up in space and can actually attack. And it's not just right. I've got it. There's a few players. Sam Salter's around. And hopefully for his sake, he won't have those headaches quite as much.
Yeah, and that's another thing you mentioned there, Sam Salter. I felt like he was sort of isolated way too much
Mm.
last season, and that's why he didn't have the impact that we were expecting him to have. Now, with more support in the attack as well, he can be sort of just that poacher because he knows that Balu Tabla or Kevin Dos Santos or Chris Tuartek, they can make things happen in the
Mm.
build-up on the wing. He just needs to be in the box now to score the goals, maybe help a little bit in build up. But like you
Mm.
mentioned before, it sort of felt like Sam Salter was dropping too much because he didn't feel like the ball was getting
Bassett
to him.
gone
And
back as well. Yeah.
exactly. So it was just there was a disconnect in the attack, and it didn't feel
Mm.
like they were off, like they were able to break at pace because they were always a bit too far behind trying to help in defensive efforts. Now with some of the players that they've brought in, hopefully we get to see more of these you know players that maybe weren't all that great last season, like a Sam Salter, uh, now have a better season because they have a bit more help across the pitch. And
Yeah.
another player that I wanted to mention potentially being a huge part of Ottawa's push for titles is Tier Walker, because he sort of steps up now into a position where you would think he's probably in the starting lineup
Yeah.
for the defense. We'll talk about our potential 11 in a little bit, but he's a young player, only 20 years old, who had a pretty big season last season. I feel like he's gonna have an even bigger season this season in that heart of the defense. And with Ottawa being such a huge defensive team in the way that they like to play, your defenders are going to be what the most important part. That foundation that you have is going to be in your defenders. So for 20-year-old Tier Walker, he's going to have a huge step up. And I feel like out of most young defenders in the league, he's probably the one that I would back having a great season this season. I think he could be a huge part of why Ottawa's defensive woes that we saw at the end of last season might not be repeated for 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to when we were looking at sort of the mid-season transfer window last year, and we were talking about how maybe Ottawa we've identified that they had a lot of loan players at the back, and maybe they wanted to start bringing in someone who could have that end of season, working with the team, building up their confidence, ready to take on next year. And we overlooked Tier Walker. I think he got his chances. He had really good performances. A couple of difficult periods when he was when they were away at Pacific one game. But he learned. You could see he was learning from everything he was getting. Like those moments in the matches, you could see that he was building up a confidence amongst those players. So that, this season comes through. I think you're right. He's got the opportunity, and he's probably one of the young players in Canada in the best position to succeed, just with the club they're at and the opportunities they've been given last year as well.
Yeah, I genuinely see him maybe following in the footsteps of like a Lucas McNaughton, and that he does pretty well in the defense. In the CPL, he becomes a standout player, and then he'll make the next step, maybe jumping up to MLS or maybe even Europe and beyond. He's a player that has that potential right now, and like you mentioned, in the team that he's in and the support that he has around them, and the fact that all he really knows is Ottawa. That's the only team he's played for in the CPL, so he has his roots here, will help him be able to push to that next level. And hopefully for him and for Ottawa, it includes pushing Ottawa to the next level as well. Before we jump, though, to our potential 11, there is one more thing I want to talk about, which might be season defining for Ottawa, and that is their starting goalkeeper. I know we chose one for our potential 11, but that is a huge point of contention. Who is going to start for Ottawa? Who's going to maybe it doesn't start, but who's going to be the one that finishes? That might be the more important question between Nate Ingham and Ryan Yessie, because Nate Ingham is a fantastic goalkeeper, and he's been there time and time again for Ottawa. But Ryan Yessie comes in as a Golden Glove nominee. He comes in as one of the best, younger players in the league at 24 years old. Definitely, for a young goalie, it's really him and Gazdov. And he's someone that I think is not going to be content just riding the bench. So for you, do you think that could be that decision of whether to start Ingham or Yeslie will sort of help Ottawa kind of push to the next level, because there's that level of competition between two very, very good quality goalkeepers?
Definitely. I mean, there's a few teams around this league who could probably do with a new number one, and Ottawa have two of them. It's a really nice position to be in, and you can only imagine Ryan Yesley's decision to go to Atletico Ottawa comes with a plan with the club, whether it being pushing each other on to become better goalkeepers, or whether this is a long-term decision he's making to learn from Nate Ingham. I mean, in Valor, he was the number one, and he's questions were raised over how he thought his development would go in Valor, and what the ceiling that he could reach. He obviously sees that ceiling's got higher by coming across to Ottawa, and there must be you'd imagine there was a plan in what sold the deal to him not just the fact that he gets to play for this team. There must be some plan involved into how he can work his way into the first starting lineup.
Yeah, and we know from time and time again that competition brings the best out of people, and I think the fact that Nate Ingham and Ryan Yesley are both gunning for that number one position, and they are both coming from sort of different backgrounds. Of Nathan Ingham is a bit more experienced. Ryan Yesley is one that's more, I guess, hungry to prove himself as he did last year. I think it'll make for a really interesting competition for them as the season goes on. Who will be the number one? And if Carlos Gonzalez is going to rotate them between games, or if he's going to let them fight it out, and then whoever deserves to be at number one will stay at number one until he loses his place. So
it's going to be big for him, for Carlos Gonzalez as well, like how he handles this. Like I say, I think there must have been a plan, and they must go into it with their eyes wide open, all three of them. But as the season goes on, these are really professional soccer players are competitive players. So there's going to be something to how he manages that throughout the season could be really important. Well, it definitely will be. But yeah, something we'll have to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, definitely. But now we're going to go into what we believe will be the potential starting 11 for Atletico Ottawa's opening game. I lied. No, we're not. We're going to talk about potential MVPs. Totally forgot about that. We're going to talk about potential MVPs. One thing that we have is that Balou Tabla is back in the league. So he immediately gets put into what might be a potential MVP position for Ottawa. You also have, obviously, Ali Bassett, who has been in that conversation many, many times again. And then I also put forth Matteo Debrienne because of the fact that he won the Under-21 MVP award last season. And if he has another, not a breakout season because he already broke out, but another stellar season like he had last season, then we might be able to see him maybe get nominated for an award, or maybe just be the Atletico Ottawa potential MVP. For you, Mike, if you had to put your money on a player having a big season this season for potentially having an MVP caliber season for Ottawa, it doesn't have to be any of the three that are pictured there. It could be somebody like maybe Tier Walker, like we were talking about, maybe Kevin Dos Santos, or any other, maybe a goalkeeper, even maybe it's Yesley or Ingham. Who do you think would be that potential MVP?
I'm going with I think Ollie Bassett will, purely because like you look at last year, I think it was 11 goals and 3 assists. With the support he's got around him, I just feel like he could end up with double digits with both. and he could be like having that support around him. I just think this is probably going to be the season where he gets the most help he's ever had, the most freedom probably on the pitch than he's ever had. So like the opportunity to really attack and to create and not have as much pressure to come back into the defensive third. So I just think this could be a year where we really see like Bassett just flourish, like have like the game like just laid out on a plate for him.
Yeah, that's true. Like we said, this might be where we see him sort of be unlocked to really, allow him to play the best football. I don't know. I feel like I'm on the hype train of Balou Tabla. I feel like he's such an exciting player, and CPL just genuinely missed a player like him. And now having him back in the league alongside along a lot of the other exciting players that we've gotten in the league since he left last season, it's just gonna make it all more exciting for the league and for Ottawa. It's just I just love watching that kind of profile of player on the pitch. It's just he's a sort of, he makes people stand up. He's somebody that makes people sit up in their chairs as soon as he gets the ball. So I'm gonna go with another obvious choice in Balou Tabla. Now we will move on to our predicted starting 11 for what will be their opening match in mid-April. No real surprises, I think, in terms of how they might line up. Nate Ingham on goal, a defense of Debrienne on the left, Tier Walker and Uimet as a center backs and Jonathan Grant on the right. It's going to be in a 4-3-3. So the three midfielders is Zapater at the anchor, Abubakar Sissoko and Ollie Bassett in the midfield, and then the two wingers, Balu Tabla and Chris Twardek, and starting striker Sam Salter. Now, Mike, this we both had pretty much we both put our 11s in, and they were pretty similar. You had a couple of differences. You also think that if they sign potentially another big center back, we might see a change of formation.
Yeah, I think I think Carlos Gonzalez loves his wing backs. He did so well with using them, and I just feel like there's a chance. What if they can improve that back line, the depth there? They'll go back to a back three, possibly. Like you've mentioned there, Jonathan Grant can be slightly flexible. Maybe they'll use him as as the right-sided defender in a back three at times. I mean, you raised before we were talking, maybe Chris Twardek could be used as a wing back. We saw Jean-Annie Arce, a winger, become a wing back. And then that would just sort of maybe push Ollie Bassett and Balu Tabla into sort of more sort of free roles behind Sam Salter, limit maybe a little bit of what Abu Sissoko can do going forward, but playing alongside Zapater when they get that chance to break, he can obviously push on, but when out of possession and playing against the ball, he's got one of the best in the league to help you like organize yourselves and prepare yourselves as a pure like defensive midfielder. So yeah, I think there could be that little shift. I think we'll see, just depending on the signings. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, we could see him go with three at the back, and you could say that even with the players they have now, maybe like you mentioned, maybe Jonathan Grant tucks in as a third center back, maybe Maxime Tissot tucks in as a third
Yeah,
center back, or we don't know much about Liberman Torres. Maybe he is somebody that Carlos Gonzalez sees as a center back, so definitely could switch to sort of like maybe like a five at the back formation, technically with the wing backs, sort of maybe like a 5-3-2.
midfield, isn't it? Rather
Yeah.
than having wingers, like having those two sort of defensive midfielders, two attacking midfielders, but they can just find spaces depending on where the wing backs are going. And we've seen quite a lot of teams do that. And maybe they'll he is looking at they look across over to MLS and you see what the Crew did, putting fullbacks as centre backs and just like trying to keep the ball, and they're able to progress it a little bit better than others. Maybe I do feel like we've gone with this sort of 4-3-3 because of what's on the paper at the moment. Like when you look at the team sheet and you look at the players you can pick from, like at this very moment, it kind of makes you feel like it's going to be a 4-3-3. But I think in the next couple of weeks we'll look at this team and the new addition would have come in. We said, okay, there's that back three sorted. Like I can see what he's doing. Like that will go back to sort of what I expect of a Carlos Gonzalez from last year.
Yeah, maybe exactly. Having those wing backs, maybe like a 3-4-2-1 kind of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe even seeing Ollie Bassett be pushed further up into maybe that center forward position behind the striker rather than in the midfield.
Yeah, exactly.
The good thing with Carlos Gonzalez, he has a lot of options. The players that he's brought in, he has a lot of options. So regardless of how he'll line them up, hopefully it'll be in a way that maximizes the talent and the ability out of all of them. But now we will move on to Halifax Wanderers. We'll switch gears all the way out east to the Wanderers. We're going back to the kitchen, and we're going to talk about also some potential new faces coming in, some outgoings, maybe talking about the way that Geyser's going to come in with year two, maybe talking about can they have that intensity on the road, and do they have enough depth to be able to perform both at home and away? And we will talk about potential MVPs for them as well, and I will not forget it this time. But let's start with their arrivals. Again, we're not going to go player by player for arrivals and departures, but we're going to talk some about some of the big ones. obviously Jeremy Gagnon-Lapare comes back to Halifax. We have Julian Dunn coming from HamCam as a big sort of defensive signing, and Ryan Telfer, another player that longtime CPL viewers will know of. For you, Mike, looking at the players that they've brought in, you can also put in Christian Valesky in there, Giorgio Probo, maybe even,
Vitor
Kareem So,
Diaz. Yeah.
Vitor Diaz, exactly. How do you see the evolution of Halifax in this year 2 under Patrice Geyser?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting so many changes. Like I said, a lot of the fringe players left rather than getting a second year of opportunities to grow. But they seem to be building definitely in that midfield and attacking line. Like they seem to have found a lot of players who could put those starting 11 players under pressure, and give them something to really think about and to work to keep. There's something about Patrice Geyser where you know that the players he's bringing in are not just because they tick certain boxes on a pitch, but also because of they come in knowing that the mentality and the philosophy and the culture that he wants to develop in a club. So these players are going to be straight in on it, and they would have bought in before they've even touched down in Nova Scotia. So that's really exciting for me. I'm really curious how some of these players adapts to coming into this team. I think we know Gagnon-Lapare from last year. We know what he can do in the league. Julian Dunn, like you've mentioned, there is coming back, but big injuries. There's a lot that he's got to work on, and a lot that Patrice Geyser's giving himself plenty of extracurricular work on top of managing a team. I think he seems to love the chaos and the busyness of the job. I can only imagine he's working about 18 hours a day.
Yeah, and especially considering that, you've brought in a lot of players, but you've also let go a lot of players. It wasn't as extreme as when he first came in, where it was basically a complete new roster. But we did see some pretty big names leave Halifax grounds, Wanderers grounds rather. And Mo Omar, huge one for Halifax. Doniel Henry, again, we were always wondering if he would stay, if he was go. He ended up leaving. And I put Callum Watson there because he was a player for me where he was sort of could be a difference maker for Halifax coming off the bench. And that's somebody that they're going to sort of need to replace in terms of being able to have quality, not only starting in the 11, but coming off the bench and, potentially competing with those starters to make them better, because they know they got somebody that can score a couple of goals on the bench and get them potentially drop down to the bench or to this technically the second string team that we know that Geyser likes to have. So you look at the players that have left. Do you feel like, because it's a lot of players, you also have Peruzza, Campagna, Ryan James, Jake Ruby, Armand Wilson, Teo Colom, like so many names. Do you feel that despite all of those names leaving, Halifax are actually in a stronger position now because they've sort of gone for quality over quantity of players?
Yeah, I think Watson's a great shout, Callum Watson, because he did push Aidan Daniels to be a better player, and a more consistent player.
Exactly.
So he's had to really work on making sure that the players that maybe he wouldn't choose to lose were replaced well. Time will tell, but it looks like on paper they've been addressing key areas of making sure that that these players are being pushed further, that they're not going to get sort of comfortable that last year I was starting 11, I fought for it, I've got it. So it's Callum Watson's gone, so now I can this role's mine. And you can only imagine that even the tiniest little bit of taking your foot off the gas, Patrice Geyser jumps on. So he's already got these players involved to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think that's why some of these players probably have gone, that they weren't pushing starting lineup players enough. because it wasn't the perfect season. It was a really, really good season, but then stuff like we've spoken with Patrice Geyser. He always wants better, and he always wants to improve, and he always wants to build. Doesn't like so. There's that was always going to be part of this off season.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I feel like the environment that he likes to have at the grounds is it's so competitive. It's so much about, not only performing as an individual, but can you perform within the team? Because the way they like to play, they need everybody on the same wavelength.
Mhm.
If you can't, even if if you're off by one training session, if you're off in one game, that could cost you your place. Like it's
Mm.
super, super competitive to the point where maybe some people would even call it a little volatile, but it breeds success. It breeds, the the players having to bring out their best because that's the only way they can stay in. So it's a very intense environment. I can only imagine. I was reading Josh Healy, the Wanderers Notebook. He went to training for one of the first preseason trainings, and he was already saying in the article he wrote on it that like already the level of competition, the level of intensity in these preseason, first
Mhm.
few sessions, they're not sort of warming up, they're not starting
Yeah,
easy, they're going in from the off.
yeah,
Already that kind of goes to show that these players, they know what's at stake, they know
Mm.
what they can become under a coach like Patrice Geyser, and they have to put their pedal to the metal immediately, or else they'll be left behind quite quickly. So yeah, definitely. I feel like maybe some of these players maybe didn't put that pedal to the metal and
Mm.
found the exit door, which sort of gives an example for all of the players that remain. That
Yeah.
like, oh, I need to perform, or else I'm
That's
out of
it.
here.
Yeah.
Like there's a level of ruthlessness to it that you can only expect at the pro level. But yeah, definitely gonna
Mm.
have some players looking over their shoulders if they don't start performing well. But I mean, looking into year two of Geyserism, the Patrice Geyser revolution at the Wanderers
Mm.
last season, we saw such a stark improvement from the Wanderers. They quickly became one of the most exciting and most entertaining teams in the entire league. Finished third only via away goal difference. So basically, for me, tied for second with Forge. I mean, there's a huge gap from the Wanderers that we saw the year before under Stephen Hart. So now we get to see what Patrice can do with a team that understands his principles, with a team that already sort of grasps what he wants to showcase on the pitch. It's not going to be about, having players need to adjust to it and everything. He already has a basis, he has a foundation, not only in his principles, but in the players themselves. And now he's only added a few other players, and it's going to be much easier to get them integrated rather than a whole new squad integrated like he did the season before. Do you think that year two is going to be twice as good as year one? Or should maybe some people temper their expectations just because maybe year one was better than expected?
Yeah, this is going to be really, really interesting how this starts because, yeah, I mean, when you listen to Patrice Geyser, he's full of confidence in his players, and from throughout the year, like he was saying, yeah, people said they couldn't do this. I believe in them. I believe in them. I believed in them, and it showed. But there is, from the outside looking in, there is still that thought of maybe they did really overachieve. Like they weren't expected to do this. There's a reason for that. They're a whole new team. There was a lot of players who have jumped up from League One Ontario, or players who maybe weren't as like they whose previous seasons weren't as high as the ones they've had last year. And keeping that momentum is going to be really difficult. Like it's not something where you can just go, well, that's worked. These players will do the same again. The other teams are now have had a year of adapting to what Patrice Geyser brings when they face him. Some of these players will be playing from last year, so it's not a huge change. they're going to have to deal with the fact that teams know what they did last year and how much of it can HFX change, how much do they want to change, if they try to, like, how much they need to keep the same. Like there's when you have such a successful first season, the second year can be really difficult to imagine, like, how, like, do we just roll with what we did, or what kind of tweaks can they make, like, from the style of this system, like in the style of play they had last year. I find it difficult to think of different tweaks they could really make without, because it could affect the good parts of the game in other areas.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because we saw, last season with Pacific, that you can bring in a lot more quality, but if you don't know how to necessarily manage it, it might actually be more of a detriment than an addition, than an advantage. And for the way that Halifax like to play, any little bit of imbalance, any misconnections, misconceptions, just anything that can sort of interrupt the fluidity that they love to play with could be fatal, because the team isn't just 3 lines or 11 players. It's one kind of living, breathing thing in the way that they like to play. And some of the if you bring some players in that might not get it right away and you throw them into that deep end, some of the players that already get it and expect that player to be in those positions and do the job that they have to do, they don't do it, then that could destabilize things. So it is like, I'm sure for Patrice, he's done some pretty intense research on all the players that he's brought in to make sure that they can fit in his philosophy, that they can fit in his style of play. But it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, like in the second season, the second season syndrome is a thing. Because we've seen it so much in football, and especially for teams that sort of overperform in their first year and set a high bar, it can be a lot of pressure at everyone in the club, not even just the players, not even on just Patrice, but everyone at the club, to be able to deliver to that level again, because that's sort of the minimum now for Patrice, which is crazy to say. I'm sure a lot of fans will be like, slow down there. But for a lot of other people, maybe on the outside, they say, if this is Halifax in year 1, I want to see what they're like in year 2. And they're already putting that expectation that, like, Halifax should be challenging the likes of Forge and Calgary, potentially Ottawa, as we were mentioning earlier, this season for the title, or should be going, for example, to the minimum to the semifinal of the playoffs, to maybe even going all the way to the final. These are big expectations that people are already putting on Halifax because of how well they performed last season. That might affect some of the players on the pitch. Now, I know that Patrice Geyser is a kind of coach that he will protect his players and he will keep his players focused on what's in front of them, and not allow them to sort of maybe listen to everything that's going on behind the scenes and with the media and the fans and everything. But it's you can't go, as much as I'm sure a lot of coaches would love to, you can't go inside players' brain and tell them what to listen to, what not to listen to, what to do, what not to do. Every person is very much different. All you can do is help teach and provide advice and the like. But I feel like year 2 is going to be a big year for Wanderers, because that's going to sort of set the tone of, if Patrice is here for the long run, whether that be 3, 4, 5 years, we don't know. But if Patrice is here for the long run, is it going to be immediate kind of upward trajectory, or is there going to be a little bit of plateau as he adjusts with new players, and as other teams start to figure out, hey, if this is how Wanderers play, let's figure out a way to stop them. And then they start to figure out that thing, and then Patrice will have to adapt.
And Galaya kicked it off with quite my usual pessimistic way of looking at it, going, yeah, so good, it has to fall. But like you say, like there is a lot that Patrice Geyser brings to the as a manager, especially motivationally. And it's not like they didn't have their issues last year. They went, was it 5, 6? How many draws did they have at the beginning of the year? Was it 6, 7?
Oh, I can't even
Like,
tell you.
it's gone out of my head now. But they were struggling to like close out games. Then they had that. Excuse
5.
me. 5 draws. Then they
5
had that,
straight draws to start the season.
big defeat at home to York. After York had had a bad run, they went to Halifax, big win, 3-0, I think it was, in Halifax. So they had their issues at the beginning of the season, and Patrice Geyser showed that, okay, like what I'm doing, I believe in, and they had to work out how to make it work. And he did that last year. So that's on the like, while it's going to be difficult, and you imagine like from the outside looking in that it probably won't be quite as good in the second year. It could well be, and it could be even better, because they did show that they can adapt and they can learn and they can improve during difficult times. That I think that's why, like we're both saying, it's really exciting to see what's going to happen here, because it's so hard to predict.
Yeah, and you mentioned like their slow start to last season. A lot of that had to do with the fact that they were away from home for 4 out of 5 of them, and that's something that I want to talk about, is the fact that can they sort of turn that around for this season, and being able to start well in those away games, because like you mentioned, they kept drawing away from home. Then they had losses to Ottawa, they lost to Cavalry, they lost to Vancouver twice away from home at Willoughby. I was there for both games, and just want to subtly put that in there.
If Patrice Geyser's not going to let you in next time.
No, next time he's not. I don't know, maybe I'm a bad luck charm for them, or good luck charm for Vancouver. But it just feels like that was their biggest issue. I mean, obviously the away goal difference is what stopped them from being second. If they managed to turn that around early at the start of next season, that could be the biggest difference maker for them in terms of where they'll finish in the table, and where they might go for the playoffs, in their position that they are. And it all really starts with, we know they're very good at home. Can they transfer that to now being solid away from home? Because I think on average, what you want across a season is basically 2 points per game, and that involves having points from away games, not just one, but a couple. Steal a couple of away wins. There are some teams that you would sort of back crumbling under the pressure of having to face Halifax even at home. So there are opportunities for them to be able to improve and to grow and be able to be a reckoning force, not just at home and away from home, but can they do that from the off? That's going to be one of the biggest questions for me.
Yeah, and like last year, the home support was immense. Like really, like it came through the TV at you, and those players fed off that. I guess looking at the bonuses and the positives of them developing into the next year is the fact that they've had that year of like now we're fully part of. We have our identity. We've got a year of being who we are. Let's go into the next one, and they don't rely on the support from their fans at home. They can enjoy it and revel in it, but they don't rely. Maybe they won't rely on it quite as much to really get them through those difficult days when you're putting in a lot of work in this style of play after a long time traveling across the country.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously like a huge factor for them, is that they have one of the longest trips compared to, you look at them in Pacific, and away days are really big away days, especially when they have to face each other like they're going to
Exactly.
do early on in the season. So it's going to be a question of not just, what happens on the pitch, but maybe are there things that they can do that they've learned from last season that can help them be better in their travels, the stuff that happens behind the scenes, maybe the timings of the travels, maybe it's, how they organize their days. Maybe they arrive a day early to allow them to be able to settle more. It's little things like this that can have a profound difference in how a team performs away from home across an entire season that I'm sure they've already put a lot of resources and attention towards. So I think that'll be huge for them moving forward because, yeah, their away form is going to be critical for how they perform in 2024. But now we're going to talk about potential MVPs for Halifax Wanderers. There are quite a few to pick from. Obviously, one of the biggest names in the CPL right now, Lorenzo Calegari, is probably a player that a lot of people would pip to be nominated once again for the award. You have Dan Nimick, who had a huge season last season and potentially could have another huge season now in the second season. I mean, he understands the league a little bit more. He'll be able to have a bit more confidence in the way that he plays because of how well he played last season. And even a player like Massimo Ferrin, because he was a player that, despite having the accolades of the goals and the assists, a lot of people, I feel like, were sort of underrating him because they were focused on Caligari and Dynamic and their performances. That Massimo Ferrin is a difference maker as well. So looking at some of the players that, these are just players that were there last season, but it could easily be Lapare, maybe Ryan Telfer, something like that. Who do you see being a potential MVP for Halifax Wanderers in the upcoming season?
Yeah, this team's one of the harder ones to pick because, like you said earlier, like it's not individuals. They all have to do a role with it. They're all cogs in the machine. They're not these star players. Despite the fact that when you look from the outside in, Lorenzo Caligari is obviously a star, but the way he plays and commits to the team of being right, this is my job, I'll do it. And so it makes it really hard, like, to think one player standing out, because as they did so often last year, like, one player would stand out one week, another one the next. Obviously, some gained headlines more than others. I'm going, because like I said it last year as well, over and over again, Massimo Ferrin. I think now, last season, he was given the chance to drift in and out of games. Patrice Geyser had so much faith in him that if we get him the ball, he's going to do something dangerous. And there were moments in matches where you'd watch them and he wasn't too involved for like 20, 30, 40 minutes at times. And then all of a sudden, like, he just takes over for 5 or 10 minutes. And he just puts players on ice. Like, he's breaking hips as players are trying to twist them down to keep up with where he's going. And I just think now he's had that year. I think now you look at the additions of Ryan Telfer, there's more pressure again to keep that role. He's going to know that I'm a CPL starter. I'm a dangerous CPL forward, and I'm excited. I think he could really take an extra step and start to dominate games more consistently and for longer periods.
I'm actually with you on this one. I think we're both going for maybe the niche pick, the hipster pick, and not going for Caligari and Nimick, opposed to our very obvious Ottawa ones.
But the Centre-back won it last year, didn't they? So
yeah, exactly. Massimo Ferrin, I think it was. He is a player that, I mean, again, he came from League One Ontario. First season in the CPL, and he performed as well as he did. Now, with a full season under his belt, this next season, you can only hope that he's going to be even better. And if he's even better than he was last season, and he's sort of put in a bit more of a starring role, still, like you mentioned, a cog in the machine, but maybe a little, players will trust him more to make that difference. Like you mentioned, that he can just do in 5-10 minutes, just put on a show. Now he'll be able to maybe do that a bit more consistently, maybe for a little bit longer. And then there's where we'll be able to see him rise from this really, really good CPL player to maybe potential MVP levels. And I can only hope that, because he's a fun player to watch. And it would be an incredible story to be able to go League One Ontario, and then within 2 seasons being, MVP candidate, that would be fantastic for the neutrals and also for the Halifax fans. So that is also going to be my pick. But now we're going to go to our potential starting 11 for Halifax Wanderers on match day 1. Now, we had some discussions before we started recording because we both had our starting 11s and they were quite different to each other of players that Halifax have brought in. Starting at the very top, Christian Valesky against Thiago Coimbra. I was going to put Coimbra as my starting striker, but you actually put Valesky, and you mentioned to me, but I would love for you to explain again what your reasoning is behind that.
Yeah, I mean, we know my love for Thiago Coimbra, and I'm sure he's going to be a brilliant and important player for HFX this year. And I think he's going to grow on what he did last year. But Christian Valesky's been brought in as an experienced head in that forward line, and I think Patrice Geyser, like just looking at the way Thiago Coimbra was used, I think he believes in him, but he's still raw. And he doesn't want to have to rely on him, and he wants to give Coimbra the chance to keep fighting and improving and working off these players. And he's a great player. I mean, you get into a sort of 60, 70 minutes into a game in Halifax as an away team, and the centre back, and all of a sudden Thiago Coimbra's thrown on. They're going to be, oh gee, how am I going to deal with this? But I think that's why Valesky's been brought in as that leading line, experienced player to see what he can do in the CPL. But knowing that Coimbra's there, like fighting, like he's going to want to take, like it's like, all right, this player's been brought in, but I'm going to do all I can to take the spot off him. That's my thoughts on it.
Fair. I mean, yeah, that's true, and Valesky does bring experience. You also have to think about, though, the under 21 minutes. Thiago Coimbra is probably the player that will fill that quota the most for Halifax, just because he's probably the player that's the most advanced at that level. Yeah, you could see maybe, Camilo Vasconcelos maybe coming in and playing a little bit more. Obviously, Tomas Giraldo is another player that fits that profile or counts towards the minutes. But I feel like Thiago Coimbra has that. So that has that advantage, I guess, over Christian Valesky, where he's like, they kind of need to play me to be able to make the playoffs. So maybe that'll make it so that he'll maybe play a little bit more. And again, the level of competition, Geyser isn't just going to throw somebody on to play for the sake of U21 minutes. He's going to make sure that they deserve to play that, regardless of. So I feel like it's going to be a good battle between them. And then, in the formation that we're playing right now, we're predicting right now, which is the 4-2-3-1. In our combined, we have Ryan Telfer on the left, Massimo Ferrin on the right, and at the 10 is Aiden Daniels. You had actually Vitor Diaz starting in your starting 11. We both had the same double pivot holding midfielders of Caligari and Gagnon Lapare, but do you think that Vitor Diaz will come in and immediately start in the starting 11 over the likes of maybe like an Aiden Daniels at the 10?
Yeah, no, I think their attacking those sort of central midfield and attacking midfielders are going to be quite fluid. And I find I think that's the hardest one to predict who will start. I mean, obviously we've mentioned Massimo Ferrin, but yeah, Ryan Telfer, you raised as he's been brought in for a reason. And he's not going to be brought in to be a backup. And I agree with you on that. I think he's got the quality to be able to go and to compete properly in this team. And unless he's not sold Patrice Geyser on his abilities in training, unless something's happening there, I agree with you. I think Vitor Diaz maybe will have to bide his time a little, but I think if he's starting on the bench, from what we spoke about before we started, it's made me more concerned for not concerned, but I think there's more pressure on Aiden Daniels now to get the goals and assists, and to get sort of more tangible results at the end of games to back up why he's the starter, because there's no doubting his quality, but he wasn't getting those numbers as much as you would have expected from a player of his level, and he was getting brought off early in games. Well, not so much early, but he was one of these players that would be rotated. Obviously, we mentioned Callum Watson was someone who was fighting for his place, and so he was coming in for him. Maybe I agree. Maybe that's what Visa Diaz is going to be doing to start with, but it's another player right on someone else's shoulder going, "I want your job."
And honestly, if you look at the midfield that the Wanderers have, that's probably where they have the best depth.
Yeah.
Because you look at the players that aren't in our predicted starting 11, you have Andre Rappersand, you have Thomas Hiraldo, you have the new guy as well, Giorgio Probo, who is somebody that can apparently play anywhere in the central areas, whether it be defensive, central, or attacking midfielder. So even Camilo Vasconcelos as well, this young player that probably is going to play some minutes to help with the under 21 quota. So it's a lot of competition in the midfield. So we're probably going to see a lot of rotation in terms of what those midfield, like what you could call five, the midfield five will look like there. So honestly, it could be anybody, but I do think that, Vitor Diaz to start with, I'll be very surprised if he usurps any of the players that we have there, just because, Aiden Daniels and Massimo Ferrin, they're kind of such good players that you kind of have to include them. And Ryan Telfer, like you mentioned, he's brought in. It's somebody that a lot of York players will know, York fans will know of, CPL long-term CPL viewers will know of. That he can be a difference maker for the team. So that is going to be very exciting to see how the midfield shapes up. But then in the defense, I mean, the defense is a little bit light in terms of
that's it.
depth right now. So, I mean, Riley Ferrazzo is the only player that you can really see starting at the left back position. You have Zachary Fernandez, who's obviously going to be starting at the right back position, but he does have Timoteo as somebody that can rotate with him. The biggest question there is in terms of center backs, because they have 4 center backs now. Dan Nimick is probably a shoo-in, given the season he had last season. But now you've brought in the likes of Julian Dunn. You've brought in the young guy Karim Sow, who won't start the season because he believes he's injured and won't be able to be fit in time for the start of the season. But you have Julian Dunn, Kyle Lockery sort of fighting for that pairing alongside Dan Nimick. That's going to be a good fight, because Julian Dunn, he's a player that has been on, for Canadian men's national team fans, been on the radar for a while to have sort of another breakout season after he had a really good stint with Valor. Coming back into CPL, you're expecting him to sort of be able to repeat that. And you've mentioned before his injury troubles. He's going to be gunning to be able to play as much as he can, because he hasn't been able to play all that much recently. So do you see that being as a potential, fighting partnership for to pair alongside Dan Nimick that might push both players to be even better?
Yeah, that's one where I think we sort of just, his injury history is why we agreed on the fact that we think Lowry and Lockery and Nimick will start the year. They had such a great year together. A great partnership was formed in that group, and for these potential starting 11, from week 1, you'd imagine they would just roll the dice with those guys again. But Julian Dunn's definitely got this quality that. And it's one way we can really be quite curious because of how adaptable their midfielders are. They're not pure wingers. They're not pure number 10s. They can go anywhere. Whether Julian Dunn, I mean, we saw with Daniel Emery coming in as a third centre back late in games. Is that something that all of a sudden Patrice guys is throwing out wing backs back 3, and but for us, looking from the outside in, it's so hard. Who do you then drop from the midfield? There's 5 quality players. So that's why Julian Dunn's the biggest question mark for me, because we don't know how fit and ready he is to go. B, that like how do you deal with taking apart such a strong defensive partnership from last year between those two centre backs? And C, do you change up the system? Like, it's really interesting. Like, that one's going to be fascinating going in, I think. Like, can you see them changing to a back three after like trialing it with Daniel Emery?
I think, I mean, I don't know if the back three was so that they could fit somebody like Doniel Henry in. I think it's maybe something that he'll want to do if he wants to shore up the defense, kind of put that back five if they're protecting a lead or something. I don't know if he'll necessarily want to do that, right off the bat starting games. But I mean, guys might take inspiration from other teams. He takes inspiration from some of the top coaches in the world like De Zerbi and Guardiola and Sarri, that he might look into playing a back three in the way that the modern way to doing it, where it's not as super defensive but more allows you to attack more. So you never know. He's somebody that I think likes to adapt his style of play to what seems to be working at the highest level. So potentially we could see a back three. But yeah, I think Julian Dunn, he'll want to get back to fitness as soon as possible, because if they don't go into that back three, he'll have to fight for his place. And Cale Lowry has a good CV from last season to say that I earned my starting place here. Come and take it from me.
Yeah.
So that will be a good battle. Before we finish up, though, one last little point that I wanted to touch on is the goalkeeping situation, because a lot of people, see Jan Fillion as the starter, but in the same article that I was reading earlier from Josh Healy, Wonders Notebook, he was talking about that there is actually a little fight in the goalkeeper between Jan Fillion, Adrian Rushnes, and the new guy that they've brought in, Daniel Clark, the English international goalie from Cape Breton, because he had a really, really good season last season for great Cape Breton that got them all the way to the final, where they won in the penalty shootouts. And he's going to be somebody that you don't be surprised if you see starting in the lineup over Jan Fillion, especially since Jan Fillion at times last season was a little bit error prone and maybe could have done a little bit better at times. Now he's going to have to look over his shoulder, because there's these young, hungry goalkeeper that's going to be wanting to start. And the way that we know that Patrice Geiser likes to have his teams where he has a starting team and he has the bench team that is trying to steal the starting places from the starting team. Jan Fillion is not going to be able to maybe have the assurances that he had last season as a starting goalkeeper. So that's going to be another potential battle to keep an eye out for. But that is it for this first edition of a season previews. We will be continuing to run through team previews, 2 clubs each week before we come into the beginning of the season. So thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast episode. Make sure to follow us once again on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC, so you can give us your thoughts on this week's episode, and as well follow Canadian Soccer Daily. Now that you're gonna be seeing us a lot more on there as well. Now we get to plug 2 different things, Mike. It's not just us. We're plugging as many people as we can now. But yeah, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. What do you think about the partnership that we're joining in? And what would you like for us to do potentially for the next season previews? Let us know. But until next time, my name is Felipe Ojejo.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.